I'm Chance Storland, and in San Antonio, military means local. This is Military City, a podcast from ExpressNews.com. San Antonio Express News senior reporter Sig Christensen was embedded with the 3rd Infantry Division during the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq in 2003 and has reported on military-related topics for decades. Each week here on the podcast, Sig and I discuss the military stories important to San Antonio, both from today and the past. And Sig, recently you and I discussed the case of a soldier without a home, a result of the now disbanded MAVNI program. Today, we're also talking about that, but a different MAVNI soldier who faces some tough decisions.
What do you do next, given that this was not intended?
What do I do next? So I have to fight for my citizenship. I have to stay focused and, finish school.
So, Sig, who did we just hear from? Who are we discussing today?
We're talking about a South Korean immigrant, Ye-ji Se, who has been in the Army for 4.5 years, or had been, until she was discharged last week. And that was not her doing. She had just recently re-upped for another 2 years in the Army. And she has been studying to become, basically what she wants to do is become a doctor. And so she's been studying in a University of Arizona online program, has 1 semester left before she earns her degree in Spanish. She's been taking pre-med courses here in San Antonio at a college here in town. So what we're talking about is someone who, for starters, has a responsible job on Fort Sam Houston. She works at Brooke Army Medical Center. She's a combat medic by training, and she's at a point where she's about to have a degree, and she thought that she was going to have her citizenship as well. She was hoping to become a U.S. citizen and stay in the Army. Well, all that's over with now. She was discharged, as I said last week. There was no particularly clear reason for that, other than she had not obtained her citizenship yet. She is due up for another interview, but the government has dragged that along. More than 2 years have passed since she was qualified to have this interview. And so she's left San Antonio. She's, I guess, living with her parents in Los Angeles. And she has a court date coming up, August 14th, in a Los Angeles federal district court. And maybe there will be some resolution here. But until then, Ye-ji Se is no longer in the Army. And that was not her plan.
And so, Sig, remind me, what is, or I guess I should say, what was the MAVNI program, which is what we're talking about really today?
It's for military accessions vital to the national interest. MAVNI was created years ago as a way to get kids into the military who have a language facility or a language faculty. They have an ability to speak more than one language. That's a language that the military would like to have. And so we had recently a story that we did on Ukrainian, a young lady who probably speaks 3 languages. She probably speaks Russian too, for all I know. They all have the capacity to speak very good English. And of course, they have their own native languages in addition to anything else they might know. And, most Americans, citizens anyway, are lucky if they can speak English. I don't mean to be too condescending here, but, let's face it. We do not produce a lot of people in this country who have multiple language abilities. We don't have many people outside of Texas and the Southwest who can speak English and Spanish. In other parts of the country, you are simply not going to find that. And the military has a lot of trouble getting people that it needs who speak those languages. They train some of them, but there have been studies done. And the studies show that even if you send somebody through a Defense Language Institute, and there are a couple of them, their capacity to learn English or to learn another language is fairly limited. They're not going to be anywhere as far along at 2 or 3 years of training as a Mavni soldier would be if they were inducted into the military and had then fast tracked on to citizenship. This was a good program. It was supported by RAND, which not only said that its Mavni graduates in the military were superior to those coming in as citizens, but it also said that the program could expand. So what's happened, of course, is that in 2016 there were concerns that some of these Mavni soldiers were possibly sleeper agents, or they were potential security violators within the Army. And so the program was slowed down. And then when Donald Trump came in, the Defense Department killed it. Now, one thing to take note about, there has been no evidence of a single Mavni soldier, airman, or sailor, and those are the services that have taken those people in. Not one case where any of those people have been accused of committing an act of terrorism or sabotage. Not one. And for many years, the Army in particular has had trouble making sure that it does not induct gang members, people who are in the Bloods or the Crips, people who are in the Mexican Mafia from Texas, or the Banditos, which are gangs that we know about quite well here in Texas. They've had a lot of trouble making sure that they don't get those people in. They actually look for things like gang tattoos. They do some look at a person's affiliations. But if you're a citizen of the United States, you simply are not going to be scrutinized by the security review processes that are in place, the way that Mavni kids are. Just so everyone knows, a typical Mavni soldier, first off, cannot hold a security clearance of any kind. So they are placed in jobs that require no security clearance. Quite a few of them are medics. That's a job that you don't need a clearance in, either secret or top secret. So what we're talking about here is a level of scrutiny that they are placed under that no citizen has to bear. It's fair to say that some citizens probably should be looked at more closely. Devin Patrick Kelly, the man who killed 26 people at a church here just south of here from San Antonio. If the Air Force had simply looked at his high school transcript or checked with his administrators in his school in New Braunfels, they would have learned that he had been suspended 8 times for a variety of offenses, including drugs. So what we're talking about here is a level of scrutiny that the Mavni kids are placed under that citizens are not. And so at the moment, we are told by the Pentagon that perhaps 2/3 of these Mavni troops will be allowed to stay in because they will pass the security process. 1/3 of them will not. 1/3 of them will fail the security screening process. So here we are. You're talking to people left and right now across the country who are being kicked out of the military because they simply could not pass the security screen.
And we'll talk more about why Ye Ji-se has been removed from the Army here in a bit, but I want to get to the first of several clips that we're going to play, as we always do here on the Military City podcast. You spoke with Ye Ji-se on her first day of her new life.
What went through your mind when you woke up today? Because this is this was the reality. This is finally the time where the thing you had been trying to avoid was finally going to happen.
So I woke up this morning terrified. I was like, oh my God, this is my last day. But then the way I calm myself down is, maybe this is normal because, people who gets out of the Army, they're about to have a whole new different kind of life from today where like your normal is going to be changing. So maybe this is a normal feeling, and then that's how I calm myself down. And then started, packing up my stuff because it was my last day in the barracks. And then I got out, and then I drove to work. And then this is gonna sound really stupid, but did you see the sun this morning?
No, I didn't. I was sound asleep.
Oh yeah. So there was this like orange sun that was like heading up. Because I had to wake up a little earlier today for work. I was like, life goes on. Sun comes up, sun goes down. And I don't know, that sun was really, really pretty today as it came up.
You're saying it made you calm?
Yeah, it did. It was 7:20. I didn't know the suns were that big.
Listening to Ye Ji-se talk about suddenly being out of the military is just, it was really sad because the Army had been her life. And it's pretty common for soldiers when they're getting out of the military to be a bit lost. They've been used to a very structured life, and they're used to taking orders, they're used to following them, and there's a camaraderie, just so everybody understands. There's a great camaraderie among soldiers. And when you are suddenly no longer part of that, it's like being in a vacuum. You no longer have your buddies around, people that you may have deployed with, or people that you might deploy with, people that you train with, people that you go out on field exercises with, and do all kinds of things that cause you to bond and get closer. Suddenly, she is gone from all that. She's been expelled from it. And so she was truly a fish out of water that day.
And so let's talk about that now. You just mentioned she was expelled from, the family, the life that she knew. I know specifically with her case, there was some issues that the military had with something having to do with visas from when she was very young, when she first came to the United States. Could you talk about that?
Yes, very quickly. The problem that she had with her visa goes back to when the owner of the language school that she ended up going to, and a federal immigration agent basically conspired to commit fraud, and they were doing fraudulent documentation for immigrants. And so her papers weren't in order at all. And that was not her fault. She was 9 years old when that happened. I'm sure she had no idea that it happened. We've all been 9 years old, and it's highly unlikely that she was in the middle of any of that.
But do you think it would be fair to say her parents might have known what was going on?
They may have, I don't know. But what ended up happening was that many years later, she was doing her interviews, which are part of her security process that she was undergoing. And she was asked about the paperwork on 2 occasions. She did not seem to know anything about this paperwork having been bad in the first interview. In the second interview, she apparently did. And she either misstated or flat out lied about it in some form or fashion. And that was enough to trigger a red flag. And so as a result, they basically said, well, you're not going to pass this interview. You can come back a year from now and try again to earn your citizenship. But at the moment, we're saying that this is a bad character incident, and they marked it as such. So she hurt herself. Her lawyer said that it was a mistake. He points out that she did not have counsel with her. She did not have anybody with her. And so she also didn't have any advice. And this is something that seems to be fairly common to some degree. Something like that comes up in the course of an interview and something isn't quite right. And the person who is giving the test or who's doing the screening then has some degree of latitude in saying, you're okay, or I find that this is an example of bad character and you fail. So that's what happened in her case. The next thing she was told was, well, you can come back and do this again in a year. 2 years have passed, and she has still not been able to do it. And as a result, as she has been waiting, somebody has nudged her out of the Army. They've pushed to get her out. And the theory is that there's somebody at a GS-13 level in the Pentagon, and there's some counterpart in the federal government that deals with all the immigration side of the issues, and they're having a conversation and pushing people like her out of the Army and delaying those interviews. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but you have to wonder why she didn't get a second interview within a year. You've got to wonder why she still hasn't had that interview. And finally, you sure have to wonder why it's taking the ACLU to haul the federal government to court and make them explain why she hasn't had that interview yet. And what they're fighting for at the moment is for Ye Ji-se to get a second interview so she could possibly earn her citizenship. If she does, she can then be legally allowed to work. She can go back to school. She will almost certainly go back to college, and she will probably seek to go into a medical school program if she can do the grades, if she can do the MCAT. But all of that hinges on her becoming a citizen, and that is going to require some movement in a federal court next week.
And we might jump on that topic a little bit more towards the end of today's episode. But I want to talk more about how Ye Ji-se, when you were speaking with her, she specifically wanted to talk about other Mavni soldiers and what they're going through, just like her. Of course, a different situation from each person, but that was something she really wanted to discuss.
I would like to mention that the other Mavni soldiers, I hope that I'm bringing all these issues to light, so like it's a way for me to help them. Or if any readers want to, reach out to help these soldiers that's trying to, do right and fight for this country, I think we should respect them and respect their choices, not backlogging them for, I don't know for how many goddamn years, and have them in this kind of like eerie place where they, have no help, or they're just stuck. And they're young soldiers too, like 20-year-old, 21. Of course the age varies, but I think a lot of them want to do good, and I think people should give them a chance instead of, hiding behind whatever reason they're giving. I don't know the specifics, but I really think we should do right by them by not holding them for this backlog and having their paperwork processed and take them where they need to go.
So obviously, Sig, being removed from the Army, though, as you mentioned, there still is the possibility that she could get her citizenship. This seems like a much better case, at least from my perspective, than the case of the Ukrainian soldier that we talked about last time we were discussing Mavny. So, not every Mavny soldier is in the same situation. And it seems like while she has been removed from the Army, Yejise may end up being able to stay in the United States, may be able to go to medical school, but time will tell. However, that all being the case, this has obviously affected her and she's had some trouble sleeping.
Well, as she said, that probably is pretty normal, and I'll bet it is. She does realize that she could be deported, and that's not out of the realm of possibility. And one thing I noticed when I was writing a story yesterday on a class action suit filed in Washington, D.C. on behalf of 7 Mavny soldiers, all of them, I think, in the Army Reserve, was that a whole bunch of them there were Chinese. And I'm kind of sitting here wondering, what is going on with that? Why is that? And it's hard to tell. I mean, let's face a couple of facts. We're living in a time where, for whatever reason, immigrants are getting a really bad rap. They are being demonized by the Trump administration, and the administration is in fact using extraordinary pressure to keep the number of immigrants down, to basically drive immigrants out of the country. It has been putting children in jails. Basically, it has been putting children, young children, in cages, locked up in fences that are basically placed inside abandoned Walmart stores. That's what's really going on here. And whether you support it or oppose it, you have got to hope that there is process. The law is followed, because that's what we are. We're a country of law. And in this case, what's happening is that Yejise is being represented by the ACLU. The 7 Mavny soldiers that I wrote about that are in today's paper, they're being represented by a law firm in Washington, D.C., and they're going to have their day in court. So however else this shakes out, the law will be followed. I think the courts will rule on the law, but a lot of people's lives hang in the balance here. And to presume that most of these people are bad would be a really poor thing for anybody to do. They got into the Army. 10,400 of these people got into the Army under the Mavny program. The Army invited them in, by the way. And the Air Force and Navy had some of those people as well, but most of them have served in the Army and the Army Reserve. And obviously, they thought enough of these kids to sign them to contracts and to say, we're going to induct you into basic training. So you have to assume that most of these people are good kids. They're folks who want to serve the country. And here's something that everybody better know. Basically, fewer than 3 in every 10 people who are citizens in this country qualify for military service. I'll say it again, fewer than 3 in 10. They cannot pass either the drug test or the drug history screening. They cannot pass the ASVAB, which is the Armed Forces Vocational Aptitude Battery. So they can't pass the mental part of it. Or they have problems like they have moral waivers because of their behavior over the years, or criminal waivers because they've been in trouble with the law. Some people would be surprised to know that felons have been inducted into the Army. I wrote about one many years ago who was in Iraq and then later Afghanistan. He had served 11 years in state prisons in Texas. And that guy now is a good, productive citizen. But at the time that they brought him into the Army National Guard, he was a felon who had served time in one of the toughest prisons in Texas. It was a place that the inmates called Little Vietnam. Now, why did they do that? Why did they bring him in? Well, because they needed him. The Army was not getting enough people to join during the Iraq War years. And in fact, most American citizens were avoiding that war like the plague. And so if you understand recruiting and retention, you and I do, because I've written a lot about it over 21 years, I can tell you right now, the typical American citizen is not going into the military, and the typical American citizen is not going into the military, and unfortunately, that has never really changed from 1997 through today. The military has been barely able to make its quota. And in some years, the Army, both the active duty, the reserve, and the National Guard, they've all fallen short. The Air Force generally has done well. The Navy has generally done well, and so too the Marines. But the Army has to sign up between 65,000 and 80 people a year. It's one of the biggest employers anywhere. And they went out looking for these kids, these Mavney kids, specifically because they needed people who could speak languages that they have trouble finding among citizens in our country. That's something that everybody ought to keep in mind. The Army didn't invite these people in out of the goodness of its heart. It was looking for a deal. The deal was this: we need you to help us speak Urdu, or Pashto, or any number of other languages that they have listed. They needed people who spoke a number of different languages that you find in the war zones that we send troops to. And in return, we promised them that we would give them a fast track to citizenship. Now, suddenly, the Mavney kids have been jerked around, and they're basically hanging on for dear life. And they're having to go to court, the federal court, to basically save their futures in this country. It's quite a mess. It's hard to even imagine, and I wonder what message it sends in 5 or 10 years when the military wants to bring in foreign kids who live in this country as legal residents. How many of them will remember what was done during this period and say, there isn't a chance in hell that I want to get near them? That's kind of what is going to come along later. There will be a payback for this. I'm sorry to say. People will trust the government less because we went out of our way to bring those people in, and now we seem to be going out of our way to kick them out.
One thing that I want to follow up on really quickly before we hear our final clip involving your conversation with Yeji Say, where she talks about whether normal life is something that's possible after everything that she's gone through. I understand the comments that you just made regarding the Trump administration, but do you think it also would be fair to say that the closure or the disbanding, however you wanted to brand that, of the Mavney program is the logical extension of the slowdown that happened under the Obama administration? It wasn't as if the Trump administration rolled in and they just closed a very healthy program. The Obama administration, correct me if I'm wrong, they were really analyzing this program and they were slowing it down.
No, and I'm not blaming the Trump administration entirely here, but I think that the Trump administration holds the lion's share of responsibility because it chose to kill the program. The program was suspended under the Obama administration, And there were probably some legitimate concerns among people in the Pentagon about security issues. However, everybody ought to ask themselves, what constitutes a thorough security review? And what constitutes a reasonable security review? That's part of the equation here. And one of the questions that everybody is going to have to ask is, was it really necessary to require that MAVNI troops be subjected to a security review that is required for top secret clearance? We're not even talking about a secret clearance here. We're talking about something even harder to get, a top secret clearance. That's a good question. Why did they require that? And this isn't I think the other half of this is, beyond what the Obama and Trump administrations have done, is that you can go all the way back to the Bush administration, which really kind of kicked off this program, the concept of bringing immigrants in who would speak languages and help the military. And that was something that the Bush administration did in 2002. So you don't think that they weren't considering these same issues 12 and 13 and 14 and 15 years ago? I just wonder if perhaps this was an overreaction to the potential of a threat. And the larger question beyond all of this is, how are we screening people who are going to become soldiers anyway? Because if you want to be honest, we should have done a better job of screening the shooter in Sutherland Springs, Devin Patrick Kelly. We should have done a much better job. There was no reason why that young man should have been taken into the military when he had been suspended as many times as he had been in high school for all kinds of things that would have raised a red flag with a recruiter. But the process that is used by the Air Force and the other services doesn't require them to look at his disciplinary record. He just has to show that he graduated from high school. So maybe we haven't done a very good job screening even citizens that are applying to become troops. And I asked that question because I've covered a lot of violence within the military, not just going to war with these troops, but, we've had 3 major events at Fort Hood that were shocking. And I really believe this. I don't think that we've done a very good job at going through the larger issues of ensuring that the people we bring into our military are all the best people. And that's going to make some people angry, but the record is out there. And Fort Hood in particular is a place where, when you've spent time covering horrific crimes, you wonder, how did those people get into the military? How was it that people did not find out about who they were sooner? How did we miss things? And we spent a lot of time trying to understand that, by the way. But it's not just the kids who come from Nigeria that we need to be paranoid about. It's quite clear to me that we need to be paranoid about some American citizens who come in the military as well.
And that's going to do it for today's episode, Sig. As I mentioned, we're going to hear one more time from Yeji Sei talking about normal life and whether or not that's something that is possible or if it's a little bit too remote. Once again, thank you for bringing attention to this topic. It's the second time we've talked about MAVNI. As you've mentioned, there's also a class action lawsuit that's pending right now, so maybe we'll cover it again. Thanks as always, Sig, and we'll talk to you here in about 2 weeks for our next episode of Military City.
Thank you. If you talk about a normal life, what is a normal life in your mind?
So
how do you view that?
number one is being safe. So not being scared when you're driving, when you see like police on your rear view. Being able to make money. Go to school and get financial aid. Travel. I think those are my top four if I had to really say what normal is.
Does normal seem possible, or does normal seem remote?
I was optimistic before. I'm trying to be optimistic now, but right now it seems a little remote. It does still seem a little far away.